that in one go they lose some of their best and the most capable people, it tells us a lot about what is going wrong in Pakistan and Afghanistan. But there is another lesson. This doctor, Jordanian doctor, made a videotape. I don't know if you saw it or not. His family said that he wanted to, last year, when the Israelis started their operations in Gaza, he wanted to go as a doctor to Gaza. That was what radicalized him. He was a very ordinary man. And then in his video he says that he decided to take revenge for Baytullah Masood, who was killed in a drone attack. So sadly we can see that these drone attacks are the best recruiters of terrorists. You kill one, 10 more come up, crop up. A report was leaked to the press that General McChrystal and Petraeus were going to ask for between 40 and 80,000 extra forces. President Obama ordered many hearings of experts, military men, Pentagon, and his own cabinet. After 7 rounds of these detailed discussions, apparently he said, I'm more confused now than I was at the beginning, do something. And so he came up with a plan. On 1st of December, just last month, he announced his new plan to send 30,000, but to put a deadline. They should finish the job by July next year. I'm sure that most of you remember when President Bush went to USS Abraham Lincoln, gave a speech in a uniform, military uniform, with a big sign put behind him, mission accomplished. Sadly, that sign came to dog him for the rest of his presidency. It became a matter of ridicule. I have a sad feeling that President Obama's words will soon come to haunt him as well. They say it will take at least till August for the remaining 30,000 US forces to be deployed in Afghanistan. So they have less than 1 year to accomplish the job. In fact, the day after, Hillary Clinton and Mr. Gates immediately came to the media and they said, no, it is not going to be the end of the mission, it's simply going to be a time for reassessment. So there we go again. It's a time for reassessment. Meanwhile, there are more than 100,000, 110,000 US forces still in Iraq, and they say that a residual force of 80,000 would remain behind. Despite all these efforts, we saw the brazen, audacious attack by apparently 7 Taliban fighters only last Monday, when they attacked Kabul, attacked the presidential palace. They couldn't get in, but nearby, the presidential administrative block, the Ministry of Defense, Ministry of Mines, and the shopping center, and they set fire to the entire shopping center. Apparently, this was a signal to the conference which we just heard, which is supposed to be held on 28th of this month, few days' time, in London, to bribe the Taliban in the same way that we allegedly did such a good job in Iraq. The Taliban said, and I quote, their spokesman after that attack said that we are ready to fight, and we have the strength to fight, and nobody from the Taliban side is ready to make any kind of deal. They said they would only talk if occupation forces are withdrawn first. The Afghans have a history from the time of Alexander to various other invaders, to the British in the last century, to the Russians a decade ago, a couple of decades ago, and to the present time. They do not look very kindly at people that they regard to be invaders. So we have a reverse process. The longer we stay, the worse it becomes, and as you know, the situation is getting worse and worse. The number of casualties is going up. In Britain, last year, nearly as many soldiers were killed as the previous 8 years put together. So the situation is getting certainly worse, and the number of Afghans, of course, are dying. Now, it seems there are many pundits with some ready questions about what should be done, and let us increase the number of forces. But very few people ask the right questions. Why are we here? What has gone wrong? Who is Al-Qaeda and the Taliban? I'm sure I'm speaking to the converted because probably all of you know what I'm going to say. Sadly, when you look at this issue, you see the responsibility lies much closer at home than we would like to admit. But as I said at the beginning, if we are not honest, at least with ourselves, here, and we cannot express the plain truth, we cannot find a solution for it. We thought on Christmas Day 1979, the Soviet forces attacked Afghanistan, panic in the West, so we started to organize opposition to the Russian invasion. However, since then, we realized it wasn't quite like that. Speaking of Brzezinski, who was the National Security Advisor to President Carter, in a very plain and blunt interview with Le Nouvel Observateur, said that this notion that we only started to organize the opposition when the Soviets attacked was false. And I'm quoting, "This aid was going to induce a Soviet military intervention. Americans started to organize these lovely warriors, holy warriors, the Mujahideen, a year before the Soviet invasion. President Carter issued a decree to arm and train them at least 6 months before the Soviet invasion." Brzezinski was asked if he regretted this. He replied, "Regret what? That secret operation was an excellent idea. It had the effect of drawing the Russians into the Afghan trap. And you want me to regret it? The day that the Soviets officially crossed the border, I wrote to President Carter, we now have the opportunity of giving to the USSR its Vietnam War. Indeed, for almost 10 years, Moscow had to carry on a war unsupportable by the government, a conflict that brought about the demoralization and finally the breakup of the Soviet Empire." After the invasion, Brzezinski wrote to President Carter, we have the text of his letter, "This will require a review of our policy towards Pakistan. More guarantees to it, more arms aid, and alas, a decision that our security policy towards Pakistan cannot be dictated by our non-proliferation policy." Because of course they knew that Pakistan was developing nuclear weapons. Doesn't matter, we have got bigger fish to fry. And we should not allow our policy to be decided by that. Later, he explained, the question here was whether it was morally acceptable that in order to keep